Hey guys, so I'm going to be talking about the first episode in a podcast called Serial by Sarah Koenig. This podcast is about a man named Adnan Syed who was convicted for killing his girlfriend, May, in 1999. There were witnesses, including his own friend Jay, who testified against him, stating that he was guilty, describing the crime in great detail. However, there was also a sound affidavit signed by a classmate named Asia McLean, stating that she and her boyfriend both saw Adnan at the library at the time of the murder. However, this affidavit was never presented during the court trial. While Adnan himself couldn't remember exactly what he was doing at the time, what teenager would? I certainly wouldn't remember if I was at the library at 2:15 on March 28th, if you ask me right now. The state took his lack of memory for where he was and his friend's testimony against him as enough evidence to imprison him for life. However, I feel that his lack of memory should have been taken with a grain of salt, because really, what teenager would remember what they were doing on just a typical day 6 weeks later? In Sarah's podcast, she starts out with an open mind and no bias. She had no personal connection to the case other than that a friend of hers had asked her to look into it. I feel that this lack of bias helped her make a more sound and convincing story. If, say, she'd gone into it, believing anything, whether he was guilty or innocent, it would have been less convincing because it could have seemed like she simply found the information that she was looking for. Instead, she presented factual information, which, by the end of the first episode, made it start to seem as though Adnan was innocent. The way in which Koenig approached the mystery, without any bias, made the information more credible to the listener. The style in which Sarah presented the story was informal, but I think this actually helped her keep her audience more engaged. Personally, it was easy to listen to and understand what she was saying. For the most part, Sarah used a conversational tone and language, which didn't make it feel like I, as the listener, had to decode the words and phrases she was saying in order to understand the facts and information. Sarah also used multiple voices throughout the episode. At the beginning, when she was exploring whether Adnan, not being able to remember with certainty what he was doing at the time of the murder, proved his guilt or not, she interviewed a few other teenage boys. They gave similar answers to Adnan's, things along the lines of, "I think I was doing this," or "I was probably at school or track practice." Later in the podcast, she included other audio clips of interviews with Jay, Adnan's friend, who testified that Adnan was guilty, Asia, the girl who wrote and signed the letter saying that she saw him at the time of the murder, and other witnesses and people closely involved with the case. By using other voices, it made me feel as though I was there interviewing them with her, not just listening as an outsider. Koenig also frequently used clips from phone conversations that she had had with Adnan. Being able to hear their own voices, the people that were talking, was able to show their attitude and feelings towards the situation, rather than just taking her word by saying the way in which they said things during their interviews. When Jay is describing the murder, he's super laid back and calm sounding, which doesn't align at all with how someone should feel when confessing to being an accomplice in murder. This made me wonder if maybe he could be the one lying. Asia sounded very frightened, which makes sense. You sign a letter making you an alibi to a convicted murderer. Then almost 20 years later, when out of the blue, a reporter comes knocking at your door asking questions, who wouldn't be scared? But perhaps the most convincing use of another voice to engage the listener was Adnan's. In Sarah and Adnan's phone calls, he doesn't appear to have any anger, fear, or resentment towards the case. He is completely calm and has simply accepted that he can't change what happened. If he doesn't have even a hint of anger in his voice for being convicted for murder, how could he have plotted the murder of his high school girlfriend? As he said, "It was high school love, nothing obsessive that I was overly angry about," or something along those lines. I found Sarah Koenig's use of a podcast for the serial to be an excellent way to present so much information. Not having to stare at a screen or focus on reading for an hour helped me to be able to stay engaged in the story for so long. The way Sarah approached the case, the informal tone she used, and the multiple voices all helped keep me engaged and interested in the story. I really enjoyed it, and I might have to listen to the rest of the series.